Hello and welcome to the Theological Family Ministry Podcast. Our purpose is to equip and encourage parents, as well as children's workers, and even pastors to disciple the children that God has put under their influence. We're trying to further the conversation about how what we believe, that's our theology, affects how we parent and how we minister. Now, as always, I'm joined by
the Right Reverend Pastor Anthony Trussoni, the family pastor at Westminster Baptist Church in Westminster, Maryland.
It's good to be back, Tony. And I'm Ben Palaz. I'm the Family and Children's Discipleship Pastor at Curtis Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia. And we've got a special guest with us today. We've got Jared Kennedy. He is one of the pastors. He's the family pastor at Sojourn Community Church. Jared, it's good to have you with us today.
It's good to be with you.
All right. Well, today we want to talk about a topic that has fallen on hard times, at least from my perspective, in evangelical circles. So depending on where you live and what your background is, the word catechism will have different connotations for you. Now, I'd assume that most of our audience at least has a category for it, but if not, that's okay. I think you'll still benefit from this conversation today. Some see catechism as something that Roman Catholics do. Others might see it as something that, well, just Presbyterians or maybe Lutherans do. But either way, it's sort of a relic of the past. Current churches, that's not something we need to bother with. It's just dry and dusty and boring. But I think the guest today has a different take on that, and he's actually taken the time to write a catechism for use in his church, and other churches have picked it up. And so we'll get to all that in a moment. But before we do, Jared, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do in service to the Lord.
As you've said already, my name's Jared Kennedy, and I serve as pastor of families at Sojourn Community Church, the Midtown congregation in Louisville, Kentucky. I've been on staff at Sojourn for almost 11 years now, and I lead our children's ministry and work with our student pastor who leads our youth ministry at the Midtown campus. I'm married to Megan. We've been married for 15 years, and we have 3 daughters, Rachel, who's about to be 13, Lucy, who's 11, and Elizabeth, who is 9 years old.
Praise the Lord.
Great.
It's wonderful. Now, I want to ask, with introductions being set, Jared, what does catechism really mean? What is it, and what does it involve?
Yeah, so catechism is just really simply, it's questions and answers used to teach Bible doctrine. So I grew up as a Southern Baptist kid in South Georgia, further south than Augusta even. And
where is that?
So I grew up in Americus.
Oh, yeah.
Southwest Georgia. So we did Bible drill when I was a kid, where we would kind of hold the Bibles, we would look up the verses as fast as we could, and kind of race to find verses of the Bible or books of the Bible, memorize Bible passages. And one of the things we always did as part of that Bible drill was a doctrine drill, where the person leading the drill would call out a doctrine question. It was something as simple as, how can a person be saved? And as children, we memorized verses from the scriptures that answered those questions. And so, from my elementary years, I was taught, Romans 10:9 and 10, if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. As an answer to that question. And nobody in that deep South Southern Baptist Church ever called that catechism. But that's all it was. It's the simple question and answer, usually that can be memorized in that sort of way that teaches basic or, throughout church history, even more extensive Bible doctrine. And so, in one sense, it's just a mnemonic. It's a memory tool to help you remember your basic theology.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to even understand the term. It's such an unusual term in our culture in our time, especially in our Baptistic churches. But literally the term just means oral instruction, and there's nothing scary about oral instruction, and it's just a way to basically teach systematic theology, which is why I've been blessed by it.
Yeah, and most of us wouldn't know this, but the Greek word katecheo, which means just to teach or instruct, shows up in the Bible. It shows up in places like Luke chapter 1 verse 4 and Acts 18:25. and Luke just uses it to talk about, hey, any kind of teaching or instruction. But very early in church history, it came to refer to a specific type of teaching. In the early church, new converts were taught the basics of Christianity by memorizing a series of questions and answers. And so, as I said just a minute ago, catechism is just that. It's a series of questions and answers that's used to teach basic Bible truth.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a helpful, non-threatening explanation of it. And now, with that said, there are a lot of catechisms that have been produced in the history of the church. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church has its own, and then there are a number of ones that sprang out of the Reformation, and some churches still use it today. So, with all those out there, why did you and you co-authored the North Star Catechism with Daniel Montgomery, correct?
That's correct.
So, why did you guys set out to make your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two reasons that I would give is, one, we wanted to go back and draw from the best of the historic Reformation catechisms, but use a language that would be understandable and digestible for kids today. So when we started producing it, there wasn't a lot of that happening. And so the New City Catechism that the Gospel Coalition uses had just come out, and we felt like this was a really helpful summary of those historic catechisms, but we were using a little bit different language in our local church to talk about the identities of who we are as a church, to teach the truth about the gospel of God's grace. And we wanted to integrate that language we were already using, both in preaching and in local church ministry, into this catechism. And so that was one thing, just to make it sort of understandable and digestible for a modern audience. Most of the other than the New City, most of the catechisms we were looking at used King James language or earlier language, and so we wanted to update that language with something that was more akin to the New Living Translation and New International Version that we were using for preaching. The second thing was a lot of times catechisms focus on, here's the doctrine that we believe, and not so much the doctrine we practice. And I think that's just, if there's any critique of the Reformed or gospel-centered movement in the Western world, it's that sometimes our doctrine doesn't have wheels. We haven't thought through, what does this actually look like as we go on mission, as we get into community. And so we wanted to use language, not that there are always specific applications of the doctrines in the catechism, but we wanted to use language that would help us think about being on mission as Christians, doing works of social justice, participating in community, going on the mission field. And so the original language that was developed, even before it was developed into a catechism, was developed to train church planners and missionaries who were being sent out from our church.
Really?
Then we took those concepts from our church planning and missionary training and began integrating them kind of back into historic catechisms. So the 5 identities that you'll find talked about in the catechism, that we as a church are worshipers and disciples. We are part of God's family. We are servants, and we are witnesses. Was developed as part of our church planner training, and then we integrated it back into the baptism formula in the catechism, following some work that Jeff Vanderstelt had done out at Soma Community Church in Tacoma, Washington. And in a similar way, kind of the threefold understanding of the gospel, God's kingdom entered into by God's through God's cross, by God's grace. That kingdom cross grace came from some church planning material that we were using from Tim Keller,
cool,
and kind of preaching grid that we were training our church planners in. Hey, there's a kingdom aspect to the gospel that is, it's situational. There are things that are going to change when the gospel comes to bear in your context and in your situation. There's a normative aspect of the gospel, substitutionary atonement. It's the way we enter in. And then there's an existential aspect of the gospel, a part that you receive and apply to your heart by grace. And the whole first part of the catechism is shaped according to those three movements, which came straight from Keller and straight from our church planning materials that we were training our church planners in as we were developing them as preachers. And so the goal was to kind of basically teach our kids this life, this Christian life, a lived theology, the same way that hopefully we're training leaders.
That's awesome, man.
That is, yeah. And if you don't know, Sojourn Community Church, they were a church plant in Louisville, and then now they have a church planting network. We actually have one down the road from us, Crawford Avenue Baptist Church, that's part of that network. And so I think that is excellent to bridge what we believe affects how we live. And actually, tomorrow we're supposed to talk to Connie Dever, the author of Praise Factory, and part of the stuff they have on their website, she quotes Martin Luther that theology is a matter of how we live and how we die. And so it's not ivory tower stuff. It does affect very mundane things, but also taking the gospel to others and helping them to live in light of it. So that was helpful.
I want to say with the North Star Catechism that our family, as well as our church, has really, truly, deeply been blessed by it. Pretty soon after I came to our church, we sought out to be able to teach that kind of doctrine to kids, and even to teach doctrine to my own kids. We sought out a catechism that I think best articulates not just the more Baptistic understanding of the faith, but one that is comprehensive and uses language that I think is more helpful. And we're really blessed to find yours, and we use it in our worship services. We use it as take-home sheets. We use it kind of in everything that we do with our kids as we encourage parental discipleship. And even in our own family, it's been so exciting. We really we go through our North Star points, as we call them at our church, every night, and it's provoked some really fascinating conversation as our children talk about what is sin. Sin is saying no to God and doing what we want instead of what God wants, and what that really means for our life. And we appreciate that. So
that's super encouraging. I'm really thanks for sharing that with me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really been a huge blessing to our lives. There's been no question. Even our youngest isn't at an age where she can really follow along, but she gets excited when we do our North Star Catechism points, and our 3-year-old is learning more and more, and he gets excited every time he can recite a point, and it's amazing how many more they can understand and follow than you really think that they can. Now, with that, I'll ask.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely, kids absorb so much, and we do similar things where in our home we picked kind of one a week to meditate on and to practice and memorize together. And at our children's ministry, we pick one per month or per 6-week unit that kind of corresponds with the stories we're teaching.
That's cool.
Through our Sunday curriculum, and the kids memorize that together, kind of as a call and response in our worship gatherings we do in our children's ministry. So actually, we make it really fun in children's ministry. Kind of what we do to close out that worship time is the worship leaders ask what time it is, and all of the regular kids have learned now that it's catechism time. And so they shout out catechism time at the top of their lungs, and then they do a little dance riff where they dance around before they recite the catechism question, which is pretty hilarious. So
nice.
It's actually the old tequila riff, and they just shout catechism at the end. So
nice.
Anyway, it's pretty funny.
I'm guessing that it doesn't happen in Presbyterian churches.
Gosh, what are you teaching our children?
Yeah, I'm sure. Nice, wonderful.
It's fun.
So, you fleshed out a little bit on in the North Star Catechism and how